Welcome to another paint class this Sunday evening. I'm very happy to say that we're going to be painting a classic subject of still life painting, the apple. I haven't chosen a regular apple. I've chosen something maybe a little more challenging, but it will be okay. I'm going to walk you through every step of the way, and we're going to paint this incredible reference image that I pulled off of Wikimedia. So if you go to Wikimedia and type in apple fruit, this image will appear. It is under the Creative Commons license, so I'm certainly able to use it as my reference image and present it here today. But if you would like the image yourself, just go to type in apple fruit with Wikimedia, and you'll have the image that you can paint from in your own time if you do want to try this exercise again. All I've done here is I've printed the reference material and just taped it with, or actually this is a blue tack. I've just blue tacked it up right beside my painting surface here. This happens to be paper. I'm going to be doing an oil painting today, and yes, indeed you can paint on paper with oil paint, but it has to be a specific kind of paper. And just let me show you what I'm working with here. This is Canson. I'm not sponsored. I just love this paper. Canson paper for oil or acrylic paint. 24 sheets, 9 by 12 inches. It's quite heavy. It's 136 pound, or if you're in Europe, 290 grams. Quite a good size to work with. This is for studies. 24 sheets for about $10. And you see the texture of this paper. You can see that what they're going for here is they're going for a texture that mimics the texture of cotton duck canvas, or it's the same. It's an attempt at the weave. It's not actually woven paper. It's just a faux texture, but it's really great for studies because this is $10 for 24 sheets. So you can do things like this. You can do studies without fear of breaking the bank, so to speak. And then on this side, I have a sheet of wax paper. This is specifically designed for painting as well. You buy them in pads of sheets of 50 for about $10. And typically I paint with my palette horizontal, but just for the purposes of this exercise, we've gone vertical. Not a problem because I don't use a lot of liquid solvents or anything like that. So, and the paint will just sit there nicely. What we're going to be doing in today's class is painting just this, but I'll be walking you through all of the various lighting effects that are taking place. You might see that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but you might not be able to exactly identify what or why it's happening. My intention today is to walk you through all of these different lighting effects. Why is that bright? Why is that dark? What's going on here? And then here. What at this? Why is that light there? I'll tell you why all of that is as it is. Why is it light back there? Okay. There are a lot of different questions to answer, but we're going to answer them by painting them. That's what we're going for today. That's the goal. So this is going to be a painting in more of the classic method where we prime the overall painting surface first with a mid-tone. We'll use something like a burnt sienna, really watered down, so to speak. It's oil paint. There's no water involved. It's actually watered down with linseed oil. We're going to water it down, and then we'll draw the apple out. It doesn't need to be exact, but we'll use in this as a reference. Draw it out, and then we'll start coloring in the different areas. And as we do, I'll explain what's going on with all of these different lighting effects. This information will be something that you'll be able to take into other objects, including people, anything cylindrical or spherical will probably react the same way to the same sort of light source. So hopefully that's the sort of meta lesson today, is lighting effects and how the direction of light or the source of light can influence different parts of the same object that should be the same color, but isn't the same color because of where the light is coming from, and also what's around it, like this bright table. So we'll be getting into a little bit of reflected light, which I would consider to be more advanced lighting. That's the goal. I anticipate this class taking about an hour. So if for whatever reason you can't stick around for the whole class, no problem. I will be posting this class immediately after on YouTube, and then you can watch it in your own pace and at your own time. And hopefully do try to practice this exercise. As always, and with all of my classes, if you have any questions or if I'm going too quickly at any point, just drop a comment below and I will be happy to stop and answer your comment and fold it into the class and maybe make it a teaching moment. I don't know what's going to happen. This is all off the cuff as always. I want to thank you very much for joining, and let's get started. If you don't have the right colors, please let me know and I'll be able to suggest some alternatives. There will be better alternatives and worse, so I'm happy to make some suggestions in that regard. What we're going to do first is an overall layer covering the entire canvas. I'm going to go with a burnt sienna. If you don't have burnt sienna, you could do an umber. Umbers are more of a chocolate brown. Burnt siennas are more of a reddish brown, and burnt sienna I think is better for organic subject matter like apples or portraits for that matter. So you're not going to paint it directly on. What you're going to do is mix it with either a paint thinner or linseed oil or both. And that's up to you depending on how runny, how liquidy you need your, or would like your linseed oil to be, your paint to be. I'm going just with linseed oil, not with any thinner. I'm going to go with quite a large brush. This is a 24 filbert. It doesn't really matter what size you're going with here. The idea is just to cover the whole surface. My brush isn't totally clean, but that's fine. That's all going to be taken care of. I've just dipped it in some linseed oil. This is just a study, so it's not that big of a deal. If I were painting this for a commission or a client, I would be sure to use new brushes each time and make sure that they're very clean. But this is a study, and so it can be a little more raw. It's going to be okay if you have some streaks. Don't worry about that. You're just going to go for full coverage first, and then we'll worry about taking care of the streaks or blending them out after the fact. If you're used to painting acrylic and not oil paint, please know that you do have time. So time is on your side with oil paintings. You can see that I had quite a lot of black on my brush, inside my brush already. So I'm getting, this is a color that very much unlike the beautifully warm burnt sienna that I'm used to. That's okay. It's not crucially important what color we use for this background color. What's more important is that we get rid of all of the white. We don't want the white. Let's talk about why we don't want the white. That's a good idea. When you have a white background, it will play with your visual perception, particularly your ability to accurately judge value relationships. When you're trying to judge the value or how light or how dark an element is, and the whole area is surrounded by bright white, or this is a very high value, then what happens is you incorrectly judge. It's not anything to do with you. It's not a personal thing. Everybody does that. It's just a fact of human perception. So we take care of that problem by toning the canvas. And that means taking your canvas from white to a mid-tone, something like a mid-gray. It could be burnt sienna, it could be alizarin crimson or sap green, any of the colors that are in mid-gray. And I'm just kind of pushing a little bit harder than I probably would normally, and that's to get all of the cracks and crevices filled in with this particular color. I'm just taking care of all of the textures. You can see that the color is quite diluted compared to, you know, it's much lighter and more diluted here than it is over here. Well, that's all of the extra linseed oil that we've added. Okay. Now with that covered, I'm just going to talk about the colors that we're going to use while you are finishing up your background. So just keep painting away. Try to get, it doesn't have to be totally uniform, but somewhat uniform background. And I'll talk about the colors that we're going to use. So the colors we're going to be using today, we're going to have a very, very bright red. And I would suggest cadmium red. Looks like this, cadmium red. Now, cadmium red, another name for cadmium red is cadmium red medium. So those are the same color, different manufacturers obviously, and slightly different. This brand, Michael Harding, is what you would call a super premium brand. This is a paint company out of the United Kingdom that has, it's just pigment and premium binder, linseed oil in this case. They don't have any fillers like chalk or talc or calcium carbonate or wax. It's just the binder and the pigment. Something like Old Holland would be in the same kind of category of the super premiums. The downside to the Michael Harding is the expense. A small tube like this is going to cost you, you know, $50, $60, $70, depending on what part of the world you're from. It does last quite a while. You know, I've had this one since 2017, so 5 years, and I'm getting to the end of it, but I've had it for 5 years. Oh, a $50, $60, $70 investment for 5 years is not that bad, considering it is literally the best red you can buy. So having said that, we're going to go with cadmium red. That's our middle red. Now I'm going to dip, there's my cadmium red. I'm going to dip up the color wheel, moving toward orange. There's a color called cadmium red light. Now this is not just a lighter version of cadmium red, it's actually a different hue on the color wheel. It's somewhere between cadmium red and cadmium orange. There's actually another color that goes here called cadmium orange deep. I wonder if I have it. I do have it. I might be able to show you. Yes. It's always better to show rather than just say. So, by the way, Gamblin paint is an incredible professional level oil paint that I do use and recommend. And this was the first oil paint that I used when I started painting, getting away from my student paints. But cadmium orange and cadmium red are here. And then between those two colors, you have these two shades, cadmium orange deep and cadmium red light. So it's, you know, it's a third of the way to orange, basically. You could think about it like that, if that's the halfway point. Anyway, we're going to be using that red and that red. And then we're going to go that way on the color wheel a little bit. We're going to go darker, slightly darker anyway. With cadmium red deep. If you don't have cadmium red deep and cadmium red light, that's okay. You can just use your cadmium red medium and mix it with something darker. If you have, let's say, burnt umber or burnt sienna, raw sienna, you could use that. If you don't, you could even use black. It's going to desaturate your color, but you need something that's of a lower value. And then if you don't have cadmium red light, that's okay. If you have an orange, use that. And if you don't even have an orange, if you have a yellow, use that. You just want to pull this red into the area where it's lighter or has a higher value. Okay, so we use those three, basically red and then a darker red and a lighter red. However you want to choose to mix that, that's up to you. We're also going to go with white. I'm going to go with a student grade white here because it is a study, and that's fine. This is titanium white. This is a product made by Winsor Newton. This is their student level brand called Winton, and this is something like a large tube like that is about $10, maybe as much as 15 depending on where you are when you buy it. So this is titanium white. Titanium, of course, is a metal in the periodic table of elements, and it looks like that. I actually got my my wedding ring made out of titanium because I think that titanium white is the basis of so many colors. It enhances so many colors, like alizarin crimson just comes to life. Dioxazine purple, incredible when adding, when you see the tint of it. Really anything that's dark and transparent, ultramarine blue as well, just incredible when you tint it. Tinting means adding white, by the way. What else? So let's get some of those reds on the board instead of just showing them to you. Whoops. Instead of just showing them to you, I'll get a couple of reds on the board. So that's, remember, you just want a lighter red. It doesn't have to be cadmium red light. You can just go with red plus yellow or red plus orange. You'll have to mix it yourself. But this is the big player. You know, something like cadmium red. If you have that, please go for that. Incredible, rich cadmium red, opaque. Incredible tinting power, light fastness of 1, which means that it basically lasts forever. It is nearly the perfect paint, cadmium red. That's going to be that. Now, here's the trick. For elements that are not in the direct light, so these ones are really vibrant. They have a high chroma, highly saturated. That's going to be on the light side of the apple, on the side that the light is hitting. On the darker side of the apple, we're going to go with more subdued, quieter paints. And I'm suggesting that we go with a little bit of black. We don't want to go with a lot of black, obviously, because black is bad for organic subjects because it's a cold color. We want to stick to warm colors. But alizarin crimson, that's going to be really nice. So we're going to go with some alizarin crimson, which is a cousin of red. Think about it like that. Alizarin crimson mixed with black is going to give us a really rich red shadow. We're going to use over here and then a little bit down here. This, and obviously, is going to be something else. So that contrast between the alizarin crimson and then the cadmium red is going to give us a nice effect of rounding. So let's go with that. If you have alizarin crimson, that's perfect. If you don't have alizarin crimson, you could use alizarin claret if you have that. If you don't have that, you could probably sneak by with some quinacridone red. And if you don't have that, you could probably just mix some red and black together, or cadmium red deep and black together. Something along those lines. But yeah, I'm going to be going with alizarin crimson. Alizarin crimson is a series 3. It's a transparent paint, unlike cadmium red, which is opaque. And alizarin crimson has a light fastness of 3, which is one of the worst ratings. What that means is that the pigment is what's called a fugitive pigment. Fugitive pigments will degrade over time much more easily than something with a light fastness of 1. For those of you new to painting and don't know, light fastness is a quality of all paints. It's always written on the back of the tube what light fastness is. And it is a measure of the paint's ability to withstand breakdown by ultraviolet radiation, aka sunlight. So, really graphic example of this is when you walk past a magazine shop and in the front window you see all of the magazines that were just put out there last week are all blue now. All of the pigments and dyes in those inks have broken down due to the ultraviolet radiation because they're really cheap pigments. Anyway, even the best alizarin crimsons are fugitive, at least compared to the cadmium reds. All right, I think you all should have your backgrounds finished now, so let's get into this drawing. I'm going to choose something like a just something like this. It doesn't really matter what shape. You can use a filbert or a square brush. This once upon a time was a square brush, not so much anymore. You can see it's all just sort of getting frayed now, but this is a size 4. It doesn't really matter. What you want to do here is just kind of rough in the outline. Here's your reference. Just let it be a reference. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just going to, this is your apple. You can do whatever you want with it. I'm going to go with just some of this burnt sienna here that I have. Don't worry too much if you have to sort of scratch in your drawing. The drawing that you do here, the paint should be slightly darker than the paint that you've already put on there, just so you can see what you're doing. So it's basically a circle, right? Let's go a little bit flatter at the bottom, and this is what's called a primary contour. This outside line, this line that separates the object from the background. We call that a primary contour. And that is to be contrasted against a secondary contour. What a secondary contour are the lines internal in the object that separate one part of the object from another part of the object. So for example, this line here on the apple, that line, I'll paint it here, draw it in. That line is a secondary contour line, as opposed to these lines here that are separating the object from the background. Those are primary contour lines. Those are just drawing terminologies, but remember, drawing is the foundation of all of art, including painting, sculpture, all digital art, and more. I'm just going to rough in this shadow underneath here, just so I can see where it's going to be. The shadow here is going to be one of the most important shadows we've done. It plays a huge part in determining a lot of these colors. And I'm going to explain just in a few moments here what exactly is going on with this quite unusual color arrangement that we see here with this apple. Let's just paint this in. Don't worry, we are going to change the colors in a moment. We're just marking down where the shadow is. Don't worry about that. There's a table that goes back here as well. I'm going to put that in. And you can see that the stem obviously is not insignificant, but not a massive player. And we'll put that down. Okay, I don't need to. Sorry. I'm going to interrupt myself to point this very important thing out. This is the shadow of the stem. We're going to make a note here because we might not be able to catch that later. And then I have just some basic shadow. I don't need to put this in, but I have some extra paint on my brush. I'm all about utility here. Let's not waste paint. Better on the painting than on a rag. It's okay. It's just going to be darker anyway. All right. With all that roughed in, if you have any extra time that you need, just drop a comment and I'm happy to wait to answer your questions. So obviously it's not the same shape as this apple, but that's totally fine. And yours doesn't need to be either. Okay, for those of you who were here last week for the paint class to watch the candle be painted, we did something pretty cool with a rag. like this. So if you have a rag or a paper towel, I think we're going to go for something like that again. It just worked so well with the candle that I really want to try it out again and promote it. So grab a rag. It can be anything. I'm using an old pair of my son's pajamas here. So anything will do. And what we're going to do is take a look at our reference here. Wrap the rag around your fingers, maybe 2 fingers in, and we're going to draw the light areas of the apple by pulling off the paint. And this is going to have a couple of different effects, or a couple of different reasons why you would want to do this. So first of all, the tone or the value, remember I always talk about value, it's a scale from 1 to 10, from white to black. That's the value scale. It's a measure of any colors. If you look at the color like it's a gray, what kind of gray is it? Is it a light gray, mid gray, or dark gray? So this area here, these if they were gray, they would be all light grays. But our canvas is mid grays. That's a problem. We can either paint a lot of heavy paint on top of it, or we can pull some of this off. So with a rag, just start pulling some of that paint off, only where you see the light parts of the apple. Now, what's a light part? Why is it a light part? Well, it's all to do with your source of light. A source of light is, well, just as the term says, it's where the light comes from. It can be a flashlight, a lamp, the sun, anything that generates its own light source is a source of light. That is the thing that's going to affect your objects, because it's going to cast its light on your object and give it that three-dimensional appearance. The reason why it gives it a three-dimensional appearance is that the light hits one side of your object and not the other side. And the difference between the light on the one side and the lack of light on the other side is the thing that makes a two-dimensional object, like a painting, appear 3 dimensions. That's why the great masters, they didn't say that they painted the objects. They said that they painted the light. Particularly, you find this with the Impressionists the most. Always trying to capture the light, painting the light, getting impressions of the light. Okay, that's most of it there. And then just on the other side of the apple back here, we have a little bit more. Don't worry too much if you can't pull off a lot of paint right now. We will be coming back to this area with lighter paint anyway. And then I have this really unusual light area down here. What's going on? Obviously, the light source is coming from the top left. Why is it lit on the bottom right? Well, we're going to talk about this to some extent in a few minutes anyway, when we get to this part. But that is reflected light. What's happening here is that the object, the apple in this case, is shiny. And shiny objects reflect light. The table is white, and white objects reflect light. In this case, the reflected light is not coming from the apple, it's coming from the table. This white table, the light's bouncing off the table and bouncing up. Now, if the table was black and the apple was matte, what you would see, this is where the light's hitting right here. You would see all of that side of the apple that my hand's covering up would just be dark. There'd be no reflected light. There'd be a line that starts there and goes all the way across like that. Everything down there would be dark. But because the table is white, the light's hitting the table and bouncing back up. That's why you get this arc. Look here. Where's my fingers going? It's an arc. That's all the light reflected off the table. And the reason why that's dark there is that that's the shadow being reflected on the apple. That's the apple's own shadow reflected on the apple. So we have one effect here, that's the table, and that's the shadow reflected. So we're going to capture all of those effects in just a few moments, and I'll tell you what colors would be appropriate. So let me just scrub off some of this table. It's like an arc there. Okay, and then also I'll pull off some of the background colors, because this is just going to be painted white anyway. There's no point in not pulling off paint at this point. You're just going to be wasting more white by trying to cover it up afterwards. And I mean, that's totally fine if that's what you want to do. Do you need to lighten the table too? Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. You don't need to, because there are no details in the table. So if you just want to go, with a lot of paint and paint on top of the table with thick white paint, you can do that. But I just think it's much more efficient to lighten the table. So let's do that. Remember, wrap the rag around your finger. I'm just kind of pushing it in, scrubbing it in. You'll see a change. I don't think enough people use this method of painting. This subtractive method is what it's called. There aren't enough people that use it. And also in drawing, you can do a subtractive method of drawing with erasers, obviously. And I would really recommend that you do that. You start to at least get indications about the three-dimensionality of your object, and it serves as a really great guide before you start putting colors down. Okay, if there are any questions, just drop them in the comments, and then we'll just get started in a moment. Some of you with keen observation skills might notice that there's some water drops on the apple. Just ignore those for now. We're not going to touch those. We're going to put them in right at the very end. Okay, where do you start? Do you start with the light? Do you start with mid-tone, or you start with dark? Well, two schools of thought here. There's no one right answer. Some people say put the lightest parts in first and then the darkest parts in first, just so you can find out where your lightest and where your darkest are, and then you can meet in the middle. Other people say put the mid-tone down, and then you can work out from that. You can go lighter and then darker. There are two other ways. One is to go with your lightest tone and then just gradually go darker and finish with your darker tone. And then lastly, you could start with your darkest areas and then just gradually go lighter. I don't adhere to one school of thought. It all just depends on the subject and how I'm feeling at the time. So usually I like to put some indications in, but nothing's ever certain or for sure. I do it a lot of different ways. Since I am using 3 different reds here, and you might have an orange up here and a red and a black mix there, this is going to require a lot of blending. So what I am going to try this time is to start with my lightest color, which is going to be white. Let's get a clear indication about where the source of light is coming from. And it looks actually like there might be a few different light sources in this room that the apple was photographed in. There's one, and that's the main one. There's a second light here. You might not be able to tell, but there are 2 lights there. And then there's a third light up there. So, and then actually there's a little sliver of a light like that. It was probably one of these lighting setups that has the 4 lamps attached to the ceiling. Anyway, you don't have to do 4 different light sources. What's important though is what you do have to do is make sure that your light is hitting at the top and at the left side. That's going to really affect everything. Okay, with that as the main light source, let's start working down from there. Now, generally speaking, that would be your terminator line. So when the light's hitting that side, there's a line like this from the top right to the bottom left. Everything on the right side of that line would be very, very dark indeed, and it would have low saturation. Everything above that brush there is in the light, so it would have higher chroma, which means more colorful, more saturated, and it would also be lighter. That's the normal run of things. But because this table is so bright, it's created this arch that I've erased back into there. So we're going to have to deal with that. That's why the lighting situation is so complicated. Let's go with our mid-red, cadmium red, medium. I'm going to put the cadmium red medium here, just below where the light source is hitting. And then I'll use the lighter red in between that and the light source and then blend up from there. So this is our highly saturated, our kind of red. And that's going to be a good chunk of this side. Don't worry if you paint into that arch right now, that's fine. I'm going to paint a little bit up here toward the top of the apple as well. And at the back, you're going to find that this is going to go so quickly. I mean, it's I think already taking shape. I don't know what you think about yours right now, but I can kind of already see it. I just want to stop myself and just call it done. Like, hey, that's a cool abstract apple, but doesn't fit too well with my personality type to leave things at this stage. So on we press. Let's go for that lighter red now. And we're going to put the lighter red between that medium red and the light source. And then you know what we're going to do. We're going to blend it in. I'm going to create an even lighter red by mixing just some titanium white with that cadmium red light. This, of course, is going to decrease the chroma, but hey, a necessary sacrifice in this case. I need some lighter areas. That's going to be okay, a little bit more. I really want to create an area where this light is hitting that is large, I think. The style of oil painting we're doing here is called alla prima, and that means, well, I don't know the literal translation in Italian, but the idea is it's wet into wet. So please don't be afraid of your colors mixing together. That's totally fine. It is expected. In fact, it is the reason why we're painting this way, so that you can do your mixing right on the canvas. Let's mix some of this white into the red. If you lose the pure white areas, that's okay. You still have lots of white. You can retouch it afterwards. We're just going to focus on blending these together. A very light touch. When you want to do your lightest touches, don't paint with your brush perpendicular to your canvas. Paint with it more like parallel. And it's far easier to do a very light touch when your paintbrush is parallel to your canvas like this. Okay. Because the light is hitting on the top left in this angle, there is a part of the apple on the other side of this dent or divot at the back here. Now, for those of you who have seen my tutorial on how to light different shapes of objects, you'll know that when I talk about how to light a cylinder, that you basically just follow the direction of the light source and keep continuing on, and you're going to get between the two light sources there, the one at the front and the one at the back, you're going to be able to see exactly where the light source is coming from, because they create a line, a straight line. Also note that the light source at the back will always be slightly darker than the light source at the front, and is the case here too. Just something to pay attention to. The more detail and the more nuance you can understand about how light works, how it deals with different textures and in different situations, the more realistic your paintings will look. So that's Always something. That's the game really with something like realism, hyperrealism, photorealism, anything that's approaching an attempt to render reality. You just have to try to understand what's going on with the light. If you can get there, that's the job. That's the job done. So how it interacts is most of the game. Let's go with carry on with that lighter red all the way around the light source and just work on your transitions. Now, the edge of the apple is further away than this part of the apple because the apple rounds off like that. What happens, how do we depict in 2 dimensions the idea that a 3-dimensional object is retracting or retreating? Well, we do that one of 2 ways. You can either make sure that the chroma is decreasing, or how saturated something is decreasing, or you can make it darker, or both actually. So that's 3 ways technically. So what that means is this area here along the side has to get darker and darker as we go back and around. Let's make that happen. I'm also going to go with a little bit of a dark. I'll go with some brown just so it's even darker on the edge. Slightly darker on the edge will make it look like it is rounded or receding. Now I'm abandoning my reference material for that. That's just applying some world knowledge about how light effects work and about how paint works to enhance my painting. Nobody's going to see your reference material at the end of the day. They are going to see your painting. So I've gone with that cadmium red now, and I'm just kind of filling in this area here that is still in the light. You don't have to worry too much about getting a lot of your painting blended in. Don't worry about that. You can leave it very unblended if you want. That's just something that comes down to personal style. So some people really like to meticulously blend and blend and blend. Other people like to leave a lot of brush strokes. I'm just kind of somewhere in between. I like it to appear realistic from, let's say, about 10 feet away. But when you get up close, I really do like to show my brush strokes. So I'm just noticing that this is a little bit too dark for me. I'm just going to add some white and decrease the chroma in that red. It is such an amazing, powerful red, but can very easily overpower all of the other elements in your work. So adding white will do 2 things. It will decrease the chroma, but also increase the value. When I talk about value, of course, with painting, I'm not talking about worth. I'm talking about how light or how dark something is. The worth of the painting is entirely up to you and your pricing sensibilities. Okay, let's deal with what's going on over here. If you need some more time, please do drop a comment, and you can give you some more time. But let's deal with what's going on the other side now. We're going to use this alizarin crimson, and I'm going to draw out some black here. I didn't put it out initially. Any black will do. If you have carbon black, Mars black, this happens to be Schwenigen black, but it doesn't need to be. It was the first one that I grabbed. Any black will do. All blacks are I was just about to say all blacks are opaque. I don't know. Maybe there is a transparent black. I don't that I'm missing. But anyway, I'm going with alizarin crimson and black. And my goal here is to make a warm black. So I'm adding this alizarin crimson into the black. Why do I want to not just use straight black? Well, black has a lot of blue in it is the problem, and blue is a cool color, and cool colors do not work well with organic material like fruit or faces. So sometimes you can get cool shadows. That's true, but that's just because shadows should be more desaturated than the part of the object that's in the light. So here we have black with the crimson, and I'm just painting in a shadow color along the bottom. I'm going to have to blend this in now. So whenever you know that you have to blend in a color, you should start away from the area that you blend. This is just a good brush technique. So you have a lot of your paint on your brush in this when you first start, when you load it up, and you want to paint away from the area you want to blend, and then you finish with the area that's going to blend when you have less paint on your brush. And that's because you don't want to accidentally put too much paint on that area that you need to blend. Then what happens is you're sort of oversteering. You have to end up putting a bunch of the other color on, and then you're just chasing back and forth, back and forth. Let's go all the way up to the top too. Alizarin crimson and black, Schwenigen black, something like that. I'm gonna go right to the edge here. Now, this is another good reason why we're not going to complete black, because we are going to put a background in, and this color of the part of the apple that's in shadow needs to be lighter than the background color, which will be black. Okay, where this dark color meets the cadmium red, that's where I'm going to put this other red that we're working with, this other darker red. And this is, you can think about it like it's a transition color, something between cadmium red and this incredibly rich alizarin crimson black shadow color that we have working. So I'm just going to basically go all the way along the blending line here. If you don't have these colors, that's totally fine. That's not what's important. What's important is that you're getting an understanding of the shapes and why they are the colors that they are. So, this is all about how the light is hitting this object to create these shapes. I'm just getting a little bit of that black and alizarin crimson now. I'm gonna paint in this stem before I forget it, because I know I'm going to forget it. Always do. There we go. So when you're blending, one trick you can do is, instead of going at your canvas in more of a perpendicular manner, you can just go more parallel like this, and then very lightly kind of pull the paint across. That's a very gentle way of blending colors together. That's quite good. Now we see this very unusual lighting effect on the bottom right corner. This is the table reflected back up on the apple, though not part of the shadow that's reflected on the apple. So look, this is the table. All of this is the white table reflected up on the apple. And within that white table, you see this shape, the shadow of the apple. We have to reflect both of those things. So now, let's do that little bit of table. I'm going to just use whatever amount of black and alizarin crimson is still on my brush, and I'm going to pull a little bit of white in there. This is going to be gray. That's fine. It should have a tiny bit of alizarin crimson in there. I'm going to leave it to your judgment, but you're basically looking at a gray, a very, very desaturated red, or crimson actually, but very desaturated. Start in the middle part of that shape and be very cautious, very gentle with this gray, because this gray is going to contaminate everything it touches. And it's really hard to blend out gray. You're basically going to have to wipe it off with a rag if you make it too big at this point. It's really a killer, gray is. Okay, now I'm going to wipe my brush off with a rag. Pull it and keep blending this gray in with this shadow color. Just going with a little bit more of the black here. Darken it up. I just want to thank everyone who is taking the time to spend with us here on Sunday night. For those of you who would like a little bit more in-depth view to art and art tutorials, please do know that I have a Patreon account and a number of tiers with that Patreon, from $2.50 a month for exclusive content up through $5 that you get your name in all my tutorials and exclusive discounts, 20% off of everything in my store. So, which is, that's a great thing. You could join the Patreon and save 20% on prints. So if you're thinking about buying some prints from my store, then that's one way to go about it. You also get coloring pages, wallpapers, and much more. I also have a print club where I send you a print once a month. That's at the next level, and there are different levels, so please do check that out. Also, if you are whatever social media platform that is your platform of choice, whether it's YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and so on, please do check out my social media in those different platforms. I really would appreciate your support. With that being said, let's just return to this apple. So we have this shadow color, and I'm just going to kind of very gently blend in. I'm continuing to wipe off all of the excess paint off of my brush. I just kind of squeeze it off and pull my brush through the rag like that, and then keep blending this white and gray. This is in shadow, and so you want there to be not much color. One way you can think about this lack of color is if you have a dimmer switch on any of the lights in your room, in any room, when you take a look at the color of an object in that room and then just decrease the dimmer switch so the room gets darker and darker, you'll notice that it's harder to see color but easier to see value, how light or dark something is. And so you'll get effects like that where there are parts of the apple or whatever object it is that appear gray, even though there's no actual gray in the object. It's still, that part of the apple presumably is the same color as that part of the apple. But that's just one of the lighting effects that you get. Now let's turn our attention to this part of the apple here. This is reflected light off of the white table, but it's red on the side that's lit, and then it goes kind of into grays and more desaturated ones here. We're going to have to reflect that by choosing this color and just adding some white. So, that's not a big deal. Let's go for it. I didn't clean my brush. I'm using that same brush with the black and the white and the gray in there. That's totally fine. That's why we paint in the order that we do. And you don't need to worry about that right now. It's just you sort of have to plan these things out mentally beforehand. Otherwise, you can do it in any order, of course. But if you plan it out in a certain order, then you don't have to clean your brush as much. And any excuse to not have to clean your brush is a great excuse as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to spend my time cleaning my brush. I want to spend my time painting. That's why Alla Prima is my preferred painting choice, because you just get to use one brush and paint without doing too much switching brushes. And I always see these people with 30 brushes. That's a lot. So it's the same color. I've just added some white, but you can see, and I don't want to have an exact tight clear line. I want a very kind of blurred line, what's called a soft line. Edges are very important in painting, and if it's a really clear line, it's called a hard edge, and a soft line is the opposite. That's a blurred line. And different objects have different with different textures. So if it's shinier or more matte, they will reflect either soft or hard lines. So the rule is, the shinier the object is, the harder the lines are. Like the more distinct they are from one transition color or value to another transition. Something like chrome is a really good example of that, or any of the metallics. You get these really hard transitions, whereas something like a rock, an unpolished, dry rock, will be very, very mild, blurred transition from one side to the other side. I'm just going to carry on with this red and white combination. Basically a pink, right? I mean, there are lots of different kinds of pinks that you could paint. Red plus white is pink, but it's more like a smoky pink or a baby pink, whereas magenta plus white is something more like a hot pink. And as I move across, I want to pull some of those other colors in to the mix here. This needs to be a lot darker on that side, so I'm going to go back to that crimson. Now, from this point on, it's just a blending game. When you want to change your colors, make sure you grab your rag and squeeze, pull the color off, and then just go back to whatever color you happen to be using. And then there's just a lot of back and forth, trial and error. Because we're using all reds, the only color that doesn't really go with anything is the black. But all the other colors go together very well. So that means that you're not really at risk of making a muddy brown. I guess the only way you could do that is if you painted your background color much too thick to start. But probably not, because we pulled a lot of that color off. So here's this white for the reflection of the table. I'm going to have to make this transition a lot blurrier. And I'm being very gentle with my brush, and it's soft transition. My brush is nearly parallel to the canvas here. I hope you're trying this technique. It really does change the way the paint moves around. We haven't done the top there yet, but we're getting there. And you can see that I'm just blending everything together. Taking care of all of those brush strokes. This is the reflection of the reflection of the apple off of the table. But it's the shadow. So there's the proper shadow, and then that's the reflection of a shadow. That's a really amazing lighting effect, if you ask me. You don't see that very often, so whoever did that, bravo to them. Again, this reference image is from Wikimedia. That's a branch of Wikipedia. So this is available under the Creative Commons license, which means that, yes, indeed, artists can use it for commercial gain. Not that this class is paid for. I'm not monetized, so it's just a free lesson. So, but were it monetized, I'd still be okay. I'm gonna pull some more of this white down across and just shape the apple. Give it some more shape underneath here where the light's hitting it, and just smooth off those transitions a little bit more. Let's do the top of the apple now. So we have that brighter part back here. Can't be as bright as the main bright part, but it can still be a little bit bright. And then I just want to show that it's still round at the top. You just have to very slowly do your blending. And if you get it wrong, it's fine. You can just either go over it, you can blend it in, or you can take a rag and wipe it all off and start again. That's kind of the beauty of doing this alla prima painting with a very limited color palette that happen to all be analogous like this, is that there's no, there are no colors that once down will ruin the painting. You can basically do anything you like. You can add red anywhere and blend it out if you like. I'm going to pull some more dark toward the bottom here, just to get it slightly rounder, show that it's this table. And then I'm going to go black and alizarin crimson, our shadow colors. This is pretty much a warm black right in the center where the stem goes. We haven't talked about the color for the stem yet. We'll do that at the very end. It'll be pretty quick. Okay, we have a lot of detail to put into the apple, but before we do that, let's just drop the shadow in and the table and the background, and then we'll come back and do the detail. I think that will be a pretty good order. So the shadow is going to be a lot of black. It needs to be darker. And then the table is white. Just take a moment and think about the order of operations here. Would it be better to put the black down for the shadow and then the white, knowing that with fresh black paint, if the white touches it, it's going to go gray? But the edge is important. So if we do the white first and then the gray on top, we might be getting some of the white in our shadow. What is the order that you would paint it in? Okay, so what I would recommend is painting the white of the table first. And I'll tell you why. We do the white of the table first and then the black of the shadow. If we get any white in the shadow, it's going to happen along the edge. And that's okay. It's going to create a slight transition from the white to the black that it's going to give a soft edge. If we did it the other way and we got any black into the white, there's a chance that I could get gray somewhere in the table that I don't want it. So that wouldn't be ideal. Anyway, it doesn't really matter because this is just a study. But if you were doing a really serious piece of commission or something, then it might come into play. I just have a ton of paint on this brush, so I'm going to dip it in linseed oil. There we go. This is the quick and dirty method. And I'm just going to try to evenly spread it out, and then I'll just blend it all after. This is a really quick method to do it. You can take your time. There's no rush with that. But you basically want to, this is the final layer for the white, so you want to put it on pretty thick. And it needs to be much thicker than the burnt sienna underneath that we've done, you can see that it's already reacting with the burnt sienna and making a light brown. That's fine. You know, in a world that you needed a perfectly white table, you only have a few choices. You can go either really, really thick white, or you can let the underpainting dry. That's why a lot of artists have 2 or 3 or 20 paintings going on at the same time. They're kind of stuck at a certain level, waiting for their paintings to dry before proceeding. But you know, you don't need to be stuck at that certain level. We're just doing a study. Just painting along the shadow line there. And now I'll try to get rid of some of these creases. Or if I do have creases, I'm gonna stretch them all the way across the entire painting, these lines, and then hopefully that will read as table. Maybe like a wood grain or something like that. I don't know. There's just the smallest bit of white underneath here that I don't think I can capture. I'll go for it anyway. There's something. I didn't really mold my apple the exact way to facilitate that easily. And then there's some more white back here. Okay, now I'm going to go with the shadow, and it can be basically black. I mean, you can go with a dark gray if you want. It's probably a dark gray. Technically speaking, your shadow color should probably be 4 or 5 tones darker on the scale, but this lighting in this situation is very extreme, so it's okay that it's going to be more than 4 or 5 tones. So I'm just going to paint along the predetermined lines. I'm going to reload because I got some white on my brush there. And instead of cleaning my brush, I'm just going to kind of overpower that white. There are a lot of different nuances to painting shadows. The way shadows become lighter and the edges are soft or dark. We don't see a lot of those nuances in this shadow because the lighting conditions is so extreme. But generally speaking, you should not do your shadow just one color with a hard edge. There should be soft edges for your shadow, and it gets softer and lighter as you move from the object. Now that I have that super dark shadow in there, I'm seeing that maybe this part here is a little bit light for my liking, so I'm going to darken that up. That's one of those kind of optical illusions. You can't quite tell how dark or how light something is because of the surrounding color. You put a dark color next to it, and suddenly it looks light. So optically speaking, I am going to have to darken that up. It is the part of the apple that's farthest from the light. And this, again, is the reflection of the shadow off of the apple itself, which is a kind of a cool concept if you think about it. Let's drop in the background now. This is also just going to be black. I'm just going to go straight black. I might pull in some of this remaining burnt sienna since I have it there, and what's the point in wasting? I'm going again with that classic Scheveningen black. It's a Dutch word that I don't know how to pronounce, so if you have any awareness of Dutch pronunciation, please forgive me. I tried. Again, with the same brush, and I'm just going to dip it into my linseed oil to increase my fluidity, not so much to decrease the opacity. That's an unfortunate byproduct, actually. I do want quite an opaque black here, but I wanted to increase the fluidity. I'm going to paint the parts of the background that aren't close to the apple first, because I don't want to catch any of that red and bring it into any other part of the background. So typically what I do is I'll paint the big areas, and then I'll do the edges, the parts that are touching the apple, and then I'll just kind of try to make the whole thing uniform after that. It's amazing how much an object pops once you get the background done, the the table and the background here. Sometimes it's hard to see. It's hard to visualize exactly how bright or how colorful something is until you drop in those backgrounds. It's okay if you do color over some of the line, paint over some of the lines. It's just practice at this point, and we're not necessarily practicing painting edges. If we were, we probably would have done the background first, really. Paint the background, let it dry, and then when we paint the foreground, we can use a softer edge. This is not really advised in academic circles to paint your background after the foreground. That's actually a big no-no. But it's a habit that I've gotten into. It's a bad habit, but it's a habit I've gotten into. And that's because I don't like waiting. I like painting the best part first. It's really one of those situations of if you when you're eating, do you eat your favorite thing first, or do you wait until the very end? Well, if you wait till the very end, what if you're full? Then you're not going to enjoy your favorite thing as much as you would when you were hungry. But then again, if you're not full and you eat your favorite thing, that's probably the best time to eat it. So there's no right answer. And there's no right answer in painting either. There's just a way that has been taught historically. And that way that has been taught historically is to paint the background first, and then the foreground. But art is definitely a discipline that encourages rule breaking. You have to be somewhat of a rule breaker to engage in this insane activity that is moving colored mud by mixing it with the oil of flax is what it is. Linseed oil comes from the flax plant. And linen does too, for that matter. So if you're painting with linseed oil, oil paint on linen, you're doubly using the flax plant. It's pretty cool to think about that in those terms. Of course, not all supports are flax. You can canvas is usually cotton. Linen's quite expensive, actually. Really good Belgian linen can be as much as $45 per yard. That's why you see most new artists using canvas. And why would you use linen anyway? Well, the weave is much tighter, and so it gives you a different textural effect, essentially. So it is better, but it's not $45 per yard versus $6 per yard. It's not that much better. So, but that's just my opinion. If you are a painter and you prefer, if you think it's worth that much, yeah, that's a valid opinion too. I'm just one person with one person's experience. And this outside edge is a little bit softer on this side. That's fine. I don't mind. Okay, we have that painted in now. Maybe I will go for a little bit lighter on the side here. If I don't, it's going to bother me. You get that feeling sometimes. You just want to do a little touch up. Okay, but no, actually I can't. It's just going to go completely gray. It's going to be a problem. So I'm going to have to leave that. It's one of those things, the background's too wet, so I would have to come back to that. I'm going to now grab a smaller brush, maybe something round, so that I can work on the details. And I reached over here and grabbed myself a number 4 round brush. This one has seen better days too. If you have a look, it doesn't look like a round brush. It looks more like a flat brush. That's totally fine considering the scale that we're working with here. This is quite a large apple. I mean, it's, you know, well, it's a lot bigger than you would expect an apple to be. Okay, there are a couple of different elements that we want to work with for our details here. There are the flecks or spots that are just naturally occurring on an apple's skin. Of course, it depends on the breed or the species of apple, subspecies, I suppose. I'm partial to Honeycrisp myself. Being from Ontario, we have so many wonderful orchards around here. But depending on the breed of apple, there are little spots and flecks. We are going to represent those. And then we also have some water spots. And we'll put in a few, not as many as you see in the picture here, but just enough so you get the idea and how to paint them. And then, of course, the stem. So let's get started. The idea when you're putting in these dots is to, so we'll go with dip your brush. So you have some linseed oil on your brush, and then you're going to twist the point so it's a nice fine point. Actually, I'm going to choose a different brush that's even pointier than that one. That one has it's just too frayed. So this is just a pointy. Anything that's kind of still got something like a point, and you're going to twist it to sharpen that point with something light, like a light red or a white, anything along those lines. So in this case, I have both white and light red. Now, you're just going to kind of randomly put your spots down, and you'll find, put them in the darker areas, these light spots in the darker areas, and then you'll find that your brush gets dirtier and dirtier, and it picks up some of the dark paint. So you'll end up putting the light spots in the dark areas, and then you can put the dark spots that you've just picked up into the light areas. So that's what we're going to go with here. These little spots. Don't do a pattern. When you're dealing with fruit and, well, almost anything in nature really, try to avoid patterns unless it's something very specific that's known for a pattern, like the inside of a sunflower, something like that. But if it's just spots on an apple, try to avoid straight lines or diagonal lines. Keep it random. Keep it nice and random. That's going to give you a much better, sort of more realistic effect. Assuming, of course, you're going for realism. You may not be. So these lots of little spots all the way and across the back too. This is what these little spots do. Even if there aren't any actual spots on your apple, what they're going to do is break up some of these areas of uniform color. And that's a big deal. That's something you want to do. It's very rare to see, especially in extreme lighting conditions, the same uniform color. So in a organic object like an apple, you really want to kind of break it up. So pull some of the dark areas into the light zones and the light areas into the dark zones. Like this. It's just going to give you a little bit of texture and make your object more believable. If you have missed any of the live painting classes, do know that they are all available for free on YouTube, and I post them immediately after the fact. And so just go to Mark Liam Smith, and you can see them all there. In addition to the live classes, I have all kinds of other content on there too, shorter how to draw videos and some longer how to draw videos. It's all drawing or painting. And feel free to leave me comments as you encounter the different lessons. And always happy to hear from you in that regard. If you'd like maybe some more content, in-depth content, do know that I do have a Patreon. Now, so I'm just taking some of the this dark red, and I'm going to put some dark spots into these lighter areas. Not too many, I don't want to overdo it, but I do want to break up some of these lighter areas just with some spots and ticks and various inconsistencies, I guess you could say something like that. I'm going to go right to black over here. And you don't have to follow a script here. It's just adding dots and spots and inconsistencies. Now I'm going to represent some of these water droplets on the shadowed side. On the dark side, it's just going to be a little bit of a lighter mark. Don't have to get into anything much more than that. And on the edge. As far as the water drops go in this part of the apple, you'll notice that you basically have a dark circle with a highlight, actually 2 highlights in it. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to do a big one here, and I'll show you how to do it with my hand first before I paint it. We're going to paint a dark circle like this, and then inside the dark circle, they're going to put 2 spots. A larger spot on the bottom side that's going to be lighter than the dark circle, and then a smaller, even brighter spot on the top side. Okay, like a smiling cyclops, basically. The head is dark, the eye is bright, and then the smile or the mouth is going to be a mid-tone. That's what we're going for. Let's do one here. The darker color should be the same color as your background color, which happens to be a cadmium red here. You don't have that darker color be darker than the background. Okay, so let's go for it. Let's do our circle. It's getting lighter because I'm putting it on top of white, so maybe a little bit more. Okay, cool. Got a nice dot there. I don't know if you can see. I'm gonna just zoom right in so you can see what I'm doing here. So I just have a dark circle. Now, and then let's do a few. We'll do another one here, and another one here, and maybe one here. Big one. And then a big one right here. I think that would be pretty cool, because we have that in our reference material, and it's in a different part of the apple too. It's like an oval, this one. Okay? If you have that, now remember, we're going to do 2 spots inside each of them. The first spot is going to be lighter than the dot, but not the brightest. So it's like a mid-tone. And I'm going to use, I'm just going to use white, but I'm going to allow that white to mix with the red that's already there. You might want to try to steady your hand if you can. I'm going to use my my maul stick here, but any way you can steady your hand would be good for this, because it's going to be quite a small dot. And we're doing the kind of the smiley face. And you just kind of dab it on there. There's no brush stroke, it's more of a dab. Let's try the other ones. Remember, toward the bottom, because you're going to be putting a highlight on the top side. Now this one is a little bit different, this larger one, because it's on the bottom side of the apple. So the highlight is all the way around the bottom of the drop. Okay, now I'm going to move on to that really bright highlight on the spots, and it's going to be the smallest dot you can paint. What I recommend is you get your titanium white, and twist your brush until you can get a nice fine point, but also thick paint on your brush. And I'll just keep it close for a moment. I'll pull it back in a second. You just want to do one dot and then pull it off. That's okay. And again with the other ones. That was suboptimal. That one was okay. Okay. That's how you do a water drop. Now let's carry on with this with these drops, but I think instead of that really extreme paint a drop in 3 ways method, what we're just going to do now is just go with straight titanium white, and then just kind of drop in some of those highlighted drops here. And there's some back here too. It's just the very brightest part of the drop. Well, there's quite a large drop up here. I don't know if we want to put that in. I guess we could. Let's do another one. Okay, dark circle. And then 2 highlights. One lighter. And then that really bright highlighted. Just like that. Should be fine. And then this one down here, because it is on the bottom side of the apple, the lighting conditions are going to be slightly different. So you're not going to get that same highlight that's coming from the top left like you get with these drops that are on the top side of the apple. On the bottom side of the apple, the highlight was actually reflected through the drop, and it's kind of coming down here on the opposite side. But you're going to get a low light on the top right side, basically on this side of the drop. So we're going to reflect that low light with either crimson or that kind of muddy red that you were doing before. That's just whatever darker red you have. And you're just going to draw the smallest line across the top on the outside of that droplet. Basically the opposite of where that highlight was. Okay, and I'll put in a few more spots and stuff here. Okay, let's go with the stem now, just because we're getting close to the end. And the stem is going to be basically a desaturated green. We're going to desaturate that green by using our burnt sienna that we have there already. I think that would be completely fine. We just need something that's desaturated. Here, I'm just going to add, there's a little blemish on the, whoops, show you like this. There's a little blemish here on the reference material I kind of like, so I have some white. I'm going to put it in there. I like it how it's counterbalancing that large drop. Okay. let's go with the stem now. So you can see from the direction of the light that the light is hitting it all along the left side, and then it's quite dark underneath. And that's to be expected. That's completely consistent with what we see here. Let me just go with... Okay, so I'll just choose any green. Any green will be fine. So for the purposes of this, I'll just go with bright green lake. This is a really nice green because it's opaque, and a lot of the greens are not opaque. Anything with cobalt usually is transparent, or at least semi-transparent, and that's fine if you're a glazer. But if you work alla prima, you prefer your paints to be opaque. You can always water them down. Water is an expression here. Don't add water to your oil paints. But bright green lake is opaque. We can always mix it now. It's very bright. It's got a lot of yellow in it, so you can choose whatever you want. But I'm gonna take the sting out of this green by mixing it with some of that black. That's gonna both desaturate it, and it's gonna darken it. So that's great. And then I'm gonna mix some white too, and it's basically gonna be mixing a gray in with the green, and that'll give us both our highlight and our low light color. So let's go with that black and mix it in with your green. You're just looking for a dark green that's somewhat believable. I'm going to trust you to use your judgment here when it comes to mixing black and green together and getting a good stem color. You're looking for the shadow first, and then we're going to add white after that for the highlight. I'm trusting you because, you know, greens are not exactly my strong suit. So the shadow goes up all the way. I'm going to go even, so I'm going to start darker. All the way up the right side. It's okay if you pull some of the black from the background. Just take note if you are, because it might affect how dark you want that to be. So I've just painted all along the one side there. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of white in with that green. White not only makes a color brighter, but it also desaturates, and that's what we want to do here. Because that green is just too saturated. It's too vibrant, so we're going to go along the left edge, the entire left edge here. There's a little bit of reflected light underneath on the right side, but other than that, all the way along this left edge. You can take your time with this. You can pull out a really small brush if you like. For the purposes of this class and this exercise, I'll just roughing it in is, I think, fine and completely acceptable. And now I'm just going to bring it all the way down to the bottom. Now with some really, really bright white, this is just thick white, I'm just going to hit that stem in a couple of different spots just to give it some texture and to try to sell the idea of a very intense light source. Oh, my pleasure, Joy. Thank you for joining. So that's going to be it. I think after this point, it's just up to you to do some more tinkering. And if you want to blend, you can do that. If you want to add some more water drops, you can do that. Again, this is just do a Google search for apple fruit on Wikimedia, not Wikipedia, but Wikimedia with an M, Wikimedia Commons, for that reference material. Print it off and then just try this exercise on your own, in your own time. And then take special attention to all of the lighting effects that we've covered today. It is, as always, my pleasure to paint for you. If you'd like to support me through my various channels, just go to markliamsmith.com and you can see that I have prints for sale starting at $25. I have various other things. I have a Patreon. I'm certainly open and welcome to receiving your support in that regard. Other than that, I'll see you next on TikTok live on Tuesday, 6 o'clock, and we're going to be painting the big one again. Thank you, Tenley. I really appreciate all of your support in the various ways you do support me. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this exercise. We'll see you around. Thank you.